we're speaking about the attribute of Chesed, of God. It's one of his attributes. We say in the Amidah, the Zoche Chasdei Avos, God remembers the kindness of the patriarchs. Firstly, the Talmud, whenever it speaks about the patriarchs, it speaks about Schus Avos, the merit of the patriarchs. And since we are the descendants of the patriarchs, we're able to draw on their merits. But yet in the Amidah, we say, Zoche Chasdei Avos. God remembers the kindness of the patriarchs. The kindness. What was the kindness of the patriarchs? We know that Avraham, his main feature in terms of the persona which he assumed was the persona of Chesed, loving kindness. He was the pillar of loving kindness. We speak about of his hospitality, that the Talmud tells us that when he had hosted the angels, which is the only narrative which is very specific, the dimension of hospitality was the equivalent of King Solomon at the height of his power, when he would serve on his banquet table. That's how he hosted them. And that's only just a glimpse of Avram. And he did this all his life. So he assumed, as God's chesed is unending within the human capacity, Avram maximized on that. A human being is finite. God is infinite. God is able to address every need of existence. As much as existence falters and fails, if God wants existence to continue, he funds it. And that's chesed. That's God's loving kindness, because he wants there should be humanity. A human being is finite. But if we do it to our maximum, we're doing our best. There's no such thing as God's best, because God is unlimited. God is infinite. But a human being, if you do your best and you can't do better, you're the equivalent of God doing what he does on an infinite level. So that's really emulating God to the T, and that's what Avram did. And because he emulated God to the T, therefore, as a result of that, the whole world existed in the merit of Avram. And therefore, we read in Pirkei Avos, in Ethics of the Fathers, that there were 10 generations from Noach to Avram, and he himself received reward for all 10 generations. What they were meant to contribute to existence, to prevent existence from being destroyed and to give existence value, Avram in his lifetime was able to underwrite that. How did he underwrite that? Mainly by emulating God through his chesed. Because whatever he did it to its fullest capacity. As I always mention the Rambam in the Laws of Tshuva, that every Jew can be as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest human being that ever walked the face of the earth. The greatest Jew that ever lived. So how could we, ordinary, literally vines on the wall, how could we be the equivalent of Moshe Rabbeinu? What was Moshe Rabbeinu's accomplishment in his life? He met his potential. But of course, we're infinitesimal compared to Moshe's potential. But if we meet our potential, as small as it may be, we're no less than Moshe Rabbeinu, because you can't be more than you're meant to be. So if a person maximizes on his endowment and you do your best, you're no less than Moshe Rabbeinu. Avraham Avinu maximized on his potential to be the pillar of loving kindness. So he was God's representation on the terrestrial level of what the model of loving kindness is. And why did he do loving kindness? For the exact same reason why God created the world. God wanted man to be a beneficiary of this existence, that if he succeeds and meets the objective of creation, he will be a beneficiary of the ultimate good, which is a relation with God, who's good on the absolute level. Avraham Avinu, what was the motivation? What was the objective of his loving kindness to people, to host people and enter into a dialogue with them, to bring them to a level of monotheism that they should actually reject all pagan beliefs, to recognize who the maker is, who the creator is, who the master is. So just as God created the world, which was indiscriminate kindness, and he had no reason to other than purely kindness. So man should be a beneficiary. Avram's kindness, the objective was to bring people in, and that he should be able to convince them and to refute every false premise or philosophy or belief that the world is not wasn't created by a monotheistic being and still overseen by the same monotheistic being, which is God himself. That's Avram. So there's an interesting message. We say in the Amidah, so we say Zoche Chazdei Avos. He remembers the kindness of the Avos. The patriarchs themselves, Avram Avinu himself, he gave his life to God a number of times. He went into the kiln. And he didn't know whether he was going to come out. But he wasn't going to bow to that idol. When he went to fight the four mightiest powers of existence, he could have been decimated. But he was committed to his nephew to save him. And he had to keep his word. He went to war. He was the victor. Anything that had to do with God's glory. And what was he declared after he was the victor? Defeating the five mightiest kings, the four mightiest kings. He was declared by the world as the Nasi Elokim. He was declared by the world, by all these paganistic nations, as the Prince of God. Not the Prince of the sun, the Prince of the moon, or the Prince of who knows what. He was declared by the world. It's clear he's the Prince of God, because the only one who's able to bring about such victory is only if God's your backer. If God's your backer, the four mightiest kings mean nothing. Nothing means anything. Because who are you up against? You're up against the Creator. When you're up against the Creator, there's no one who could stand up against the Creator. Avraham Avinu, representing the Creator, that was the basis why he was the victor. So when Avram brought about victory and defeated and vanquished these four kingdoms, what was the bottom line declaration? Nasi Elokim, you are the Prince of God. You are the Prince of the Almighty. You are the Prince of the infinite being. You're the Prince of the Creator of existence. This was the ultimate sanctification of God's name. So through Chesed, through indiscriminate kindness, unlimited kindness, what did he bring about? He brought about the objective of creation, which through kindness, you bring people to realizations. People, they host people. There's a certain person, he studied in Baltimore, and he was a genius. And he went to Hopkins. And every course he took at Hopkins, during the 4 years he was there, he had a perfect average. So when he graduated, and there was a question what he should major in graduate school, among all the subjects he took, each professor advised him that he should major in his course, his subject matter. Why? Because they weren't aware that as he had a perfect score in this subject matter, he had a perfect score in every other subject matter. So each one, not knowing that, advised him, since you have a perfect score here, this is what you should go take the graduate program. But he was perfect in everything. What did he do? And he was tremendous, as a young man, had a tremendous grasp on the Talmud. So he decided, he applied to Harvard Law School. And he went to Harvard Law. When he went to Harvard Law, he gave the professors a run for the money, because his background was Talmudic analysis, which is a similar approach to law. And he was able to dissect the law and find certain fallacies and certain understandings, and he confronted the professors with this. He graduated with honors from Harvard Law. And his expertise was in bankruptcy law. That was his expertise. That was his niche. He wrote a 900-page book on bankruptcy law. And he applied for a position in Champlain University, which is the part of the University of Chicago Law School, as a professor in bankruptcy law. So when he came before the board, after they saw his credentials, they said to him, so could you tell us what you know about bankruptcy law? And all the people who were interviewing were lawyers. So he takes out his 900-page book and he says, this is what I know about bankruptcy law. Presents the book on the table, says, read the book, then you'll know what I know about bankruptcy law. He got the job. So what did he do? He had an obligation. He had to teach 4 hours a week. He had a lecture 4 hours a week. The rest of the week, he was free. What did he do the rest of the week? He sat and studied Torah. He wrote novellae, Torah novellae, and that's what he did. And then what came, the question is, was he able to get tenure? He couldn't get tenure. Why? Because to be able to get tenure, you had to sit with the students and drink beer and have pretzels and socialize with them. And if you couldn't rub shoulders with the students and be one of the guys, you weren't going to get tenure. And because of who he was, as a Talmud Chacham, as an observant man, as a committed Jew, it wasn't his fare, so to say. That wasn't his area of expertise. And because of that, they would not give him tenure. So you know what he did? He left. And he moved to Maryland, to Baltimore. He became a professor at the University of Maryland Law School. And he became a rabbi in Silver Spring, Maryland. You understand? You understand? Avraham Avinu at his table, when his chesed, which was on par with God's chesed, within human capacity, was to the maximum, as they say in the vernacular, he didn't shoot the breeze. Maybe left the window open. I'm sure in the Middle East, what kind of breeze they had coming through the window. Though he had 4 entrances to his tent from every direction he came. But the discussion was serious discussion. Where did it all begin? Why do we exist? All this unlimited hospitality. What's its value? What's its purpose? Who's our benefactor? Why are we beneficiaries? This was the discussion of the subject matter, which they spoke about. And through this dialogue, there was no person who ever entered into Avram's tent who entered a pagan, did not leave a monotheist. Never failed. Always a success. So what was the objective of Avram's chesed? The objective of Avram's chesed, loving kindness, was identical to God's objective of chesed, of creating this existence. It has a specific purpose. That you should be beneficiaries of the absolute good. But when are you beneficiaries of the absolute good? If you recognize my glory. If you recognize and appreciate who I am, and you acknowledge that, then you will merit the absolute good, which is a relationship with me. That's exactly Avram. So Avram, when he emulated God within the context of loving kindness, it was literally, exactly, precisionally, exactly with the objective of God. And as a result of that, what was God's location in Avram's life? In the Holy of Holies, that's where God's presence was. And Avram, when he was able to achieve that special level, and he was circumcised, God's location on the terrestrial level was where Avram was. Because Avram, the persona, his level of representation was exactly God. You know, you walk into a person's home and they designed it together with the architect. And you walk into the house, you say, you know, when you look at this home, every room, every amenity reflects the resident, reflects everything about the person who lives there. Lahavdil, Avram's home, Avram's being, every fiber of his being, his mind, his emotion, his action. It's like he had a shingle on the house. This is the temple. This is the temple of God. Therefore, because every aspect of his being was for that purpose, through the attribute of loving kindness, that was God's dwelling existence. The domicile of God in Avram's life was his home. Wherever Avram was, that's where God was. So the terrestrial became the celestial became the terrestrial. That's what happened.
We're shooting out as long as we could get a siren any time.
They've been shooting down.
If they're still shooting, we can get a siren at any time.
Excuse me, somebody's speaking in the background. Naim?
Norman, you should mute, Norman.
Okay. Not a problem. So we speak about the Zoche Chazdei Avos. Vis-a-vis God, the patriarchs, of course, we have the merit of the patriarchs. But God remembers the Chesed. It was the kindness of the patriarchs that they gave their lives to address the objective of creation. It's as if they did Chesed with God. They did, even though they were obliged, but they went beyond. The patriarchs were Noahites. They were not Jews. But even though they were Noahites, they kept the 613 commandments, 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments. So they went beyond the pale. Why did they go beyond the pale? Because they understood the only way existence ultimately can meet its objective, they have to go beyond the pale. So what they did, which was above and beyond their obligation, that was Chesed. Because if they wouldn't have been the founding patriarchs of the Jewish people. There would have never been a Sinai. As a result of that, what they did was really Chesed. They did loving kindness to God. So Hashem remembers what they did. He remembers Chazdei Avos. The reason why we're beneficiaries is because we have the Schus Avos. We have the merit of the patriarchs. But what does God remember? He remembers the level of dedication to Him, that they went beyond the call, the pale, to do for Him, so there should be a Sinai. So there should be a chosen people. That existence should be able to meet its objective of purpose. Which is what? There should be a nation, should be for the sake of God's glory. And the only nation that exists for the sake of God's glory is the Jewish people. Now, the atrocities that are taking place now in Israel, they're atrocities that we cannot relate to the cruelty, to the demonic evil of these people, of what they're doing to these innocent children, men, women, what they're doing with a glee, with a joy, and whatever it is. But you want to know something? We just had Simchas Torah. And we say over there, Tuku l'raglecho. The Jews submit to your feet. You know, throughout history, we had very painful moments. The way the Romans, they destroyed the temple. The way they slaughtered Jews. There was blood, there were rivers of blood flowing through Shalayim at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. The pogroms, the Nazi era, Yamach Shemam B'Zichra, all this. Despite that, we accepted God's will and we did not waver. We accepted His decree. Hashem is Dayan Emes. Although we don't understand, the pain is beyond excruciating. It's beyond our capacity, but we submit to God. That's the Jews' claim to fame. Our level of dedication and belief is one of a kind. There's never been a nation in the history of this existence like the Jewish people. We accept your decree and we don't ask questions. But how do you understand it? We don't have to understand it. If you're the creator and you are that, we don't have to understand. We accept it. What's going on today, we should take it and strengthen our faith and trust in God. Innocent children being burnt to death, being put in cages like animals, a level of cruelty not to be seen since the Nazi era. The American government says it's worse than ISIS. How do we accept it? You know what? We accept it. We don't question it. And if we do accept it and don't question it, that will be the basis for our victory. Because as I said, as Avram went to war against the four mightiest kings, because all his chesed was only for God's glory, that we accept and suppress every question and accept it, that's the basis for our glory. That's the basis for our victory. Because it's God's glory. It's God's world. And we don't question God. That's what it's all about. I was listening to something from somebody who lives in Israel. He was a student of the Kloisenberger Rebbe. Kloisenberger Rebbe, his name was Rabbi Kusiel Yehuda Halberstam. It was a city in Romania called Kloisenberg. He had thousands of Hasidim. He had a wife and 11 children. Most of his Hasidim were murdered by the Nazis. His wife and 11 children were murdered by the Nazis. And he was in Auschwitz for nearly a year. And he shared with this person, who was a very close student of his, today this man is in his mid-70s, that he never, ever questioned God's decision. Never, ever accepted it. Total faith, total trust, never to question it. You know, it's easy. It's not easy. Just to be able to be aware of what's going on now, it's difficult enough. And if you're able to accept it, so you can imagine the person who experienced the loss, 11 children and a wife, plus a whole dynasty being annihilated, and not to have a question. This is tremendous. This is heroic. This is one of a kind. This is the ultimate sanctification of God's name. But that's chesed. We do that because we're addressing the objective of creation. The objective of creation, it's for God's glory. We live for God's glory. We die for God's glory. Person is a patriarch. He goes to war. He dies for God's glory. You know, he doesn't know whether he's coming back. But he goes, knowing he may die. But if it's God's glory, he lives his life for God's glory. Or as the patriarch, for the glory of the country. For the glory of the king. And that's the history of the Jews. And that's why we exist. Because the core of the Jew is that. That's the backbone of the Jew. You know, it's interesting. The Jews were always criticized by God for being a stiff-necked nation. Am kshei oref, stiff-necked. You want to know something? It has the two sides to that coin. Stiff-necked means you are contentious and you don't change your position, even when your position is wrong. But on the other hand, if you have that characteristic of stiff-necked, when you have your position of the right position, the whole world will be coming down on you. You're not changing your position. And that was Avram Avinu. The whole world wanted to decimate him, to burn him, to kill him, to mutilate him. Avram did not change. He did not wince. Avram is called the Ivri. He took on the world single-handedly. Avram. And you know something? He had tens and tens of thousands of followers. He took on the world single-handed. Whoever heard of such a thing? Avram did. You know why? Because he was so attached and connected to his backer, which was God himself. Nothing was too difficult. No obstacle couldn't be removed. Because when God's your backer, as God creates, God wills, it shouldn't be any longer. Or it should be differently. So we ourselves, if we tune into that channel and we hook in on that understanding of where we come from, and we're also stiff-necked. We don't wince. We don't sway. We don't vacillate. And we're committed to the fundamental and the ideals of what God wants. Then God says, this is my nation who I glorify myself through them. Through you, I will be glorified. That's what it's all about. So therefore, we're beneficiaries of their merits. But what did they do for God? Living their lives as they did, providing a domicile existence for God, where the divine presence was, they did a chesed Hashem. They were only Noahites. They had no obligation to do more than 7 Noahide laws. But they went beyond to display God's glory throughout the world. And the world took on a whole different level of value. I'm going to stop here and just a few comments because we have a class at 1 o'clock.